The grand solstice banquet of the Iron River Pack was designed to be intimidating. It was a display of excess crystal chandeliers that cost more than a house, floors made of imported marble, and the air thick with the scent of roasted venison, expensive perfume, and raw, unchecked power. 300 of the most lethal shifters on the East Coast were gathered in one room, and Kaelen Thorne was invisible to every single one of them. That was the point of being a Dormant. In a world of wolves, bears, and tigers, Kaelen was nothing. She was 24 years old and had never shifted. She had no inner animal, no claws, no status. She was a ghost in a gray servant's uniform, clutching a tray of champagne flutes until her knuckles turned white. She was only there to pour, to bow, and to disappear. But in the next 10 seconds, invisibility would no longer be an option. The music, a soft, live jazz quartet, didn't fade out. It stopped abruptly. A fork clattered against a plate, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Then, to silence. A silence so heavy, so suffocating, that Kaelen could hear the heartbeat of the man standing next to her. At the center of the room, the crowd had parted like the Red Sea, but they weren't bowing in respect. They were backing away in terror. Underneath the head table, huddled in the shadows of the velvet tablecloth, was a child. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old. He was small, frail, dressed in a miniature tuxedo that was torn at the shoulder. But it wasn't his size that had 300 grown predators trembling. It was his eyes. They were glowing a violent, electric violet, and in his small, shaking hand, he gripped a serrated steak knife. This was Jax, the heir to the Obsidian Ridge Pack, the son of the High Alpha, and right now, he looked less like a boy and more like a cornered animal. A low, guttural growl vibrated from his small chest. It was a sound that shouldn't have been possible for a human child, a sound that triggered the fight or flight instinct in every wolf in the room. "Steady," a guard shouted. Kaelen's breath hitched. She watched as 4 security officers raised their rifles. They were aiming tranquilizer darts. But the weapons looked heavy. Military grade. They were aiming at a kindergartner. "Stand down." The voice that boomed across the hall was deep enough to rattle the window panes. High Alpha Ronan Draven stepped into the light. He was a nightmare in a bespoke suit. 6'4", with shoulders that strained the fabric of his jacket and a face carved from granite and cold fury. He was the most feared male on the continent, a widower who ran the Obsidian Ridge with military precision. But right now, looking at his son, the High Alpha looked helpless. "Jax," Ronan commanded. His voice was laced with alpha power, a compelling force that usually forced anyone to their knees. "Drop the knife. Come to me." It was the wrong move. The alpha command didn't soothe the boy, it assaulted him. Jax flinched as if he'd been struck physically. The violet light in his eyes flared brighter, crackling with raw, unstable magic. He slashed the knife through the air, letting out a shriek of pure panic. "He's going to breach," one of the guards yelled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Sir, we have to put him down. If you fire that weapon, I will rip your throat out with my teeth," Ronan roared. Stepping between the guards and his son, chaos was seconds away. The air crackled with aggression. The wolves were losing control, their instincts screaming at them to attack the threat. Kaelen didn't think. She didn't calculate. She just felt. She looked at the boy under the table and she didn't see a monster. She saw a mirror. She saw the terror of being small in a world of giants. She saw the panic of being surrounded by people who only wanted to control you, never to understand you. The silver tray slipped from her fingers. It hit the marble floor with a deafening crash, shattering the champagne flutes. Glass flew everywhere. Red wine splattered across the white floor like blood. Every head turned toward her. For a split second, Kaelen was the center of the universe. She didn't run away. She didn't run toward the guards. She ran toward the knife. "Stop," Ronan shouted. Reaching for her, she ignored the king. She ignored the guns. She slid across the polished floor, the glass slicing into her knees, skidding until she was 5 feet away from the growling child. And then, she did the impossible. In a room full of alphas posturing for dominance, Kaelen surrendered. She dropped to her knees. She sat back on her heels, folding her hands in her lap. She didn't look the boy in the eyes that was a challenge. Instead, she lowered her head, tucking her chin to her chest, and swept her hair to the side. She exposed her neck. It was the ultimate sign of submission in shifter culture. It was an offer of absolute trust. It said, "I am not a threat. You can kill me, and I will not stop you." The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the banquet hall. "She's suicidal," someone whispered. "He'll carve her up." Under the table, the growling stopped. Jax froze. The violet glow in his eyes flickered, dimming just a fraction. He had been ready for a fight. He had been ready for shouting, for pain, for darts. He wasn't ready for this. Kaelen kept her breathing steady, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She projected every ounce of calm she had left in her soul. "It's too loud," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, trembling, but soft. "I know. It's too loud. And they're too big. And you're scared." Jax cocked his head. The knife lowered an inch. "I'm scared too," Kaelen admitted, closing her eyes. "But I won't hurt you. I promise." For a heartbeat, time stood still. The guards lowered their weapons. Ronan stood frozen, his hands clenched into fists, watching the servant girl gamble her life on his son's humanity. Then, movement. Jack scrambled out from under the table. He moved with a feral speed, a blur of motion. "Kaelen." "Move," Ronan shouted, lunging forward. But he was too late. Jax collided with Kaelen. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull back. She opened her arms. The knife clattered to the floor, spinning away harmlessly. Jax didn't attack. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, right where her pulse was frantically beating. His small hands gripped the fabric of her cheap gray uniform, clutching it so tightly his knuckles turned white. He let out a sob, a broken, watery sound that shattered the tension in the room instantly. He inhaled deeply, breathing in the scent of her. She didn't smell like fear anymore. She smelled like cheap soap, rainwater, and dried lavender. Kaelen wrapped her arms around the boy, pulling him against her chest, rocking him back and forth. She rested her cheek on his messy, dark hair. "I've got you," she whispered, over and over. "I've got you. You're safe." Within seconds, the tension left the boy's small body. The violet light in his eyes extinguished completely, leaving them a soft, human brown. His breathing slowed. He was asleep. He had passed out cold in the arms of a stranger. Kaelen looked up, tears streaming down her own face, and for the first time, she realized who was standing over her. High Alpha Ronan Draven was staring at her. His golden eyes were wide, blown with shock. He looked from his sleeping son to the girl bleeding on the floor, his expression unreadable. He took a step toward her. The crowd parted instantly. "Don't touch him," Kaelen whispered fiercely, her maternal instinct overriding her common sense. She pulled Jax closer. "He just fell asleep. If you wake him, he'll panic again." Ronan stopped. He blinked, as if waking from a trance. A servant had just given an order to a king, and for some reason, he was inclined to obey it. "Who are you?" Ronan asked, his voice rough, stripped of its earlier command. Before Kaelen could answer, a hand grabbed her shoulder and yanked her backward. "Get up, you clumsy idiot." The spell was broken. Bryce, the beta of the Iron River pack, hauled Kaelen to her feet. The movement jarred Jax, who whined in his sleep but didn't let go of Kaelen's dress. He hung from her like a limpet, forcing her to stumble to support his weight. "I am so sorry." "Hi, Alpha," Bryce sputtered, his face red with embarrassment. He glared at Kaelen with pure venom. "This creature is one of our kitchen staff. She's a Dormant. Useless. Defective. Clearly, she lacks the brain power to understand protocol." Bryce shook Kaelen's arm roughly. "Let go of the prince. Kaelen, get back to the kitchen before I have you thrown in the kennels." Kaelen winced, trying to pry Jax's fingers loose without waking him. But the boy held on with supernatural strength. "I can't," she gasped. "He won't let go." "Then cut him off," Bryce sneered, raising his hand to strike her. The word was spoken softly, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. Ronan Draven moved. He didn't run. He blurred. 1 second, he was 5 feet away. The next, he was standing directly in front of Bryce. Ronan reached out and grabbed Bryce's wrist, stopping the blow inches from Kaelen's face. "Touch hair," Ronan said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal whisper. "And you will lose this hand." Bryce paled, his knees buckling under the pressure of Ronan's aura. He snatched his hand back as if burned. Ronan turned his attention to Kaelen. He stepped into her personal space, towering over her. He reached out, his large, calloused hand moving slowly, clearly telegraphing his intent so as not to scare her. He brushed his knuckles against her cheek, wiping away a smear of dirt. And then it happened. A jolt of static electricity, hot and sharp, arced between them. It wasn't just a spark, it was a physical blow. Kaelen gasped, her eyes widening. Ronan's hand jerked back slightly, his pupils dilating until his eyes were almost entirely black. He stared at his own hand, then at her. He felt it, that pull, that magnetic, impossible gravity. "You're bleeding," Ronan said, his gaze dropping to her knees, where the glass had sliced her skin. "It's fine," Kaelen stammered, overwhelmed by his scent cedar wood, ozone, and the deep, terrifying smell of a storm about to break. "I'm fine. Please, just take your son so I can go." "Go," Ronan repeated the word as if it confused him. He looked at Bryce, who was cowering nearby. "Who is she to you?" "She's nobody," Bryce insisted quickly, desperate to salvage the situation. "She's my ex-mate. Actually, rejected 3 years ago. Like I said, she has no wolf. She's just a debt slave working off her parents' funeral costs. She's worth nothing." "Nothing," Ronan echoed. He looked at the boy sleeping peacefully in Kaelen's arms, something his own staff of expensive doctors and trainers hadn't achieved in 6 months. Ronan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a checkbook and a fountain pen. "How much?" Ronan asked. Uncapping the pen, the room went silent again. "Excuse me," Bryce blinked. "The debt," Ronan said, writing on the check against his palm. "Her contract. Her life. How much does she owe you?" Well, with interest. And the housing. And the food." Bryce stammered, greedy calculation lighting up his eyes. "Maybe 50,000, but she..." Ronan ripped the check from the book. He didn't hand it to Bryce. He let it flutter to the floor, landing in the pool of spilled wine. Bryce scrambled to pick it up. His eyes bulged. $5 million, Bryce shrieked. "Sir, this is a mistake. You wrote 5 million. I don't make mistakes," Ronan said coldly. He turned his back on the beta, dismissing him entirely. He looked at Kaelen. "Pack your things," Ronan said to her. What?" Kaelen stared at him, bewildered. "Where am I going?" Ronan leaned in, his lips brushing her ear, his voice sending shivers down her spine. "My son has chosen you," he murmured, "and I have bought your freedom." He straightened up, addressing the room, his voice booming with finality. "Kaelen Thorne is no longer a servant of the Iron River Pack. She is now under the protection of the Obsidian Throne. Anyone who insults her insults me. Anyone who touches her D's." He placed a hand on the small of her back, a possessive, heated touch that branded her through the fabric of her uniform. "Walk with me, Kaelen," he commanded. And for the first time in her life, Kaelen didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like she was waking up, clutching the sleeping prince to her chest. She let the High Alpha lead her out of the hall, leaving her old life and her stunned ex-mate in the dust. Outside, a line of black armored SUVs waited in the rain. The door opened. The darkness of the interior beckoned. Kaelen stepped inside. She didn't know it yet, but she wasn't just stepping into a car. She was stepping into a war. And the man sitting next to her wasn't just a king. He was her fate. The rain didn't stop. It battered the roof of the armored SUV like bullets, sealing them into a private, terrifying world. Inside the cabin, the silence was louder than the storm. Kaelen sat frozen against the plush leather seat. The interior smelled of expensive scotch, heated leather, and him, cedar and ozone. The scent of the High Alpha filled every inch of the air, thick enough to taste. It was intoxicating, and it was terrifying. She looked down at Jax. The boy was still passed out in her lap, his small fists gripping her dress so hard his knuckles were white. He was a dead weight, heavy and warm, the only anchor keeping her from floating away in panic. Across from her, Ronan Draven watched. He hadn't stopped watching her for 2 hours. He sat with one leg crossed over the other, a tablet in his hand that he wasn't reading. His golden eyes were fixed on her face, dissecting her, analyzing her. "Stop thinking so loud," Ronan murmured. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards of the car. Kaelen flinched. "I'm sorry, Alpha. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to," Ronan said. He leaned forward, the sudden movement making the cabin feel instantly smaller. "You smell like pure terror, Kaelen. It's souring the air. I'm not used to this," she whispered, gesturing vaguely to the luxury car, the convoy of guards outside, and the sleeping prince in her arms. 3 hours ago, I was scrubbing pots. Now you are property of the Obsidian Throne," Ronan finished for her. The words were cold, possessive. "Make no mistake. I didn't buy your debt out of charity. I bought you because my son hasn't slept more than 20 minutes at a time in 6 months. Tonight, he's been asleep for 2 hours." He looked at the sleeping boy, and for a fleeting second, the mask of the ruthless king slipped. Kaelen saw something else in his eyes: exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that no amount of power could fix. "Do not make me regret this," Ronan warned, the steel returning to his voice. "If you hurt him, there won't be a place on this earth you can hide from me." The car slowed. The tires crunched over gravel. Kaelen looked out the tinted window and gasped. Obsidian Ridge wasn't a house. It wasn't even a mansion. It was a fortress carved directly into the side of a jagged, black mountain. Towers of dark stone pierced the storm clouds, lit by floodlights that cut through the snow. It looked impenetrable, cold, lonely. "Welcome home," Ronan said dryly. The car stopped in a massive stone courtyard, before the engine even cut. The door was wrenched open by a team of guards. The cold mountain air rushed in, biting at Kaelen's bare arms. "I'll take him," Ronan said, reaching for his son. Jax woke up swinging. His eyes snapped open. glowing that dangerous violet hue. He let out a snarl, his teeth baring at his own father. He scrambled backward, climbing up Kaelen's chest like a frightened monkey, wrapping his legs around her waist and burying his face in her hair. Mine. The boy growled. It was a single, distorted word, but it froze everyone in the courtyard. Ronan stopped, his hands hovering in empty air. Pain flashed across his face, sharp and raw. His own son was rejecting him. "It's okay," Kaelen said quickly, her hand instinctively going to the back of Jax's head to soothe him. She looked at the alpha. "He's just disoriented. Let me carry him inside." "Please." Ronan's jaw tightened. He looked at the girl holding his world in her arms. He nodded once. Stiffly, "Follow me." They walked into the grand foyer. It was a cathedral of black marble and gray stone. It was beautiful, but it felt like a mausoleum. There were no flowers, no photos, no warmth. Waiting for them was a line of staff, standing at rigid attention. At the front stood a woman who looked like she was carved from ice, Mrs. Graves, the head housekeeper. "Hi, Alpha." "Mrs. Graves said, dipping into a stiff curtsy. Her sharp eyes immediately landed on Kaelen, narrowing with disgust. She took in the stained gray uniform, the messy hair, the cheap shoes. "I see we have picked up a stray." Mrs. Graves sniffed. "I will have the servants' quarters in the east wing prepared. We can hose her down in the laundry room before she enters the nursery." Kaelen shrunk back. The shame was a familiar weight, heavy on her shoulders. "No." Ronan's voice sliced through the air. He stripped off his suit jacket, a garment worth more than Kaelen's entire life earnings, and draped it over Kaelen's shivering shoulders. The heavy fabric engulfed her, wrapping her in his heat and his scent. "She is not staying in the east wing," Ronan commanded. "Prepare the royal guest suite, the one connecting to the nursery." Mrs. Graves' mouth dropped open. "The royal suite, sir. That room is reserved for visiting dignitaries. Surely you don't intend to put a Dormant in the family wing." "She stays where my son stays," Ronan growled, his alpha aura flaring, making the shadows in the room lengthen. "And Graves burn that gray dress. Get her silk. Get her cashmere. If I see her in rags again, you're fired." He turned and strode toward the stairs, his black shirt clinging to the muscles of his back. He didn't look back. Kaelen was left standing in the center of the hall, wearing the king's coat, surrounded by enemies, clutching a sleeping prince. 2 weeks passed. Life at Obsidian Ridge fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. The castle was a place of whispers and shadows, but the nursery became a fortress of light. Kaelen threw open the heavy velvet curtains, letting the winter sun flood the room. She didn't try to train Jax. She didn't force him to sit still or learn his alphabet. She simply existed with him. They built massive forts out of sofa cushions and silk sheets. They had picnics on the floor, eating grilled cheese sandwiches and apple slices. For the first time in years, the nursery wasn't filled with the sounds of screaming or breaking glass. It was filled with the sound of humming. Kaelen hummed constantly soft, wordless melodies that seemed to vibrate in the air. Whenever Jax started to get agitated, whenever the violet light flickered in his eyes, Kaelen would hum, and the rage would evaporate. But the nights were harder. It was 2:00 a.m. on a Tuesday when the insomnia finally drove Kaelen out of her room. The castle was silent. The stone hallways were freezing. Kaelen wrapped a thick wool cardigan over her silk nightgown and wandered down to the library. She pushed open the massive oak doors and froze. She wasn't alone. The library was lit only by the dying embers of a fireplace. And standing by the window, staring out at the snowstorm, was Ronan. He held a glass of amber whiskey in one hand, and he was shirtless. Kaelen's breath hitched in her throat. She had known he was strong, but this This was violence carved into flesh. His back was a landscape of muscle and scars. Thick, jagged white lines crisscrossed his skin, claw marks from wars fought long ago. He turned slowly. The firelight danced over his chest, highlighting the dark ink of tattoos that swirled over his shoulders. He didn't look surprised to see her. Couldn't sleep, his voice was rough, like gravel grinding on glass. I didn't know you were in here, Kaelen whispered, clutching her cardigan tighter. I'll leave. It wasn't a request. Ronan walked toward her. He moved with the predatory grace of a wolf stalking a deer. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his bare skin. How is he? Ronan asked, looking at the ceiling toward the nursery. He's sleeping, Kaelen said softly. He made a friend today. A spider in the garden. He named it Bob. Ronan let out a short, rusty sound. A laugh. It transformed his face, making him look 5 years younger. A spider. Ronan shook his head, taking a sip of whiskey, the heir to the most lethal pack in the Americas. And he plays with bugs. He's gentle. Kaelen defended him. The world is just too loud for him. He feels everything. The anger. The pressure. It hurts him physically. Ronan went still. He lowered the glass. Stepping closer, he invaded her personal space, backing her up until her legs hit the edge of a leather armchair. And how do you know that, Kaelen, he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. How do you know what he feels? Because I feel it too, she admitted, looking up into his golden eyes. Ronan stared at her. His gaze dropped to her neck, where her pulse was fluttering wildly. He reached out, his fingers grazing the bare skin of her collarbone. The static shock was stronger this time. It snapped between them like a whip. Kaelen gasped, her body arching into his touch instinctively. Ronan didn't pull away. He pressed his hand flat against her chest, right over her heart. His palm was calloused, hot, and heavy. You are a Dormant, Ronan murmured, his eyes searching hers, confused and hungry. You have no wolf. My senses tell me you are human. Weak. A fragile. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could smell the whiskey on his breath. So why, he whispered, why does my wolf pace inside my chest every time you walk into a room? Why does my son, who hates everyone, cling to you like a lifeline? He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. The touch was agonizingly tender. What are you? Kaelen Thorne. Kaelen trembled. She wanted to lean into him. She wanted to tell him that she didn't know, that she felt like she had been waiting for him her entire life. I'm just a maid, she whispered shakily. Ronan's eyes darkened. He leaned in, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear. You are a liar, he growled softly, and I'm going to find out the truth, even if I have to tear this world apart to do it. He pulled back, leaving her cold and aching for more. He finished his whiskey in one swallow and slammed the glass down on the table. Go to bed, Kaelen, before I forget that I'm a gentleman. He turned and walked into the shadows, leaving Kaelen standing by the fire, her heart racing, her skin burning where he had touched her. She wasn't just the nanny anymore, and he wasn't just the king. The line had been crossed, but neither of them saw the figure standing in the doorway. Watching them from the darkness of the hall, Lady Vespera, the council's favorite socialite, stood in the shadows, her perfect red lips curled into a sneer as she watched the king touch the servant. Enjoy him while you can, little pet, Vespera whispered to herself, her eyes glinting with malice. Because tomorrow, I'm coming to play. The greenhouse at Obsidian Ridge was a miracle of engineering. In the dead of winter, surrounded by 10 feet of snow, the glass dome held a tropical jungle. It smelled of jasmine, damp earth, and humid warmth. It should have been a paradise. But to Kaelen, it felt like a cage. She sat on a wrought iron bench, watching Jax chase a butterfly near the koi pond. For a moment, the peace was almost believable. Then came the sound of heels clicking against the stone path. Click, click, click. The rhythm was precise, sharp, and predatory. Lady Vespera glided into the garden. She was arguably the most beautiful woman Kaelen had ever seen, and easily the most dangerous. Her blonde hair was pinned back in an elaborate, braided crown, and her emerald dress cost more than the entire town Kaelen grew up in. Vespera was the daughter of the Northern Council High Elder. She was bred for power, bred for politics, and everyone assumed bred for Ronan. So, Vespera's voice was like silk wrapped around a razor blade. This is the little pet everyone is whispering about. Kaelen stood up instinctively, wiping her palms on her dress. Lady Vespera, I'm Kaelen. I'm the help. Vespera interrupted, smiling. It was a cold, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Yes, we know. The dormant maid who thinks she's a nanny. Vespera walked closer, invading Kaelen's space. She circled her, looking her up and down with open disdain. Ronan has always had a soft spot for broken things, Vespera said, glancing at Jax, who was crouching by the water. But don't confuse charity with affection. Sweetie, you're a novelty, and novelties get boring. Kaelen bit her tongue. She wanted to run. She wanted to grab Jax and hide in their room. But she couldn't show fear. Not to this woman. Did you need something? My Lady Kaelen asked, keeping her voice steady, just to be neighborly. Vespera chirped, her tone shifting to fake brightness. I'm hosting a small tea in the gazebo. Just us girls and the prince. My father sent some treats from the capital. It would be rude to refuse. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. 10 minutes later, Kaelen found herself sitting at a glass table, her nerves pulled taut as a bowstring. Vespera poured tea from a silver pot, chatting idly about pack politics, her words filled with subtle digs at Kaelen's low status. Jax wasn't interested in the conversation. He was staring at the platter in the center of the table. It was piled high with gourmet cupcakes, red velvet, swirled with cream cheese frosting, dusted with silver sprinkles. They looked delicious. Go on, little prince, Vespera cooed, pushing the platter toward the boy. It's your favorite. Red velvet. Jax looked at Kaelen for permission. Kaelen hesitated. Something felt off. The air in the greenhouse had shifted. The jasmine scent was suddenly overpowered by something else. Something sharp. It's fine, Vespera insisted, picking one up with a manicured hand. Look, I'll even unwrap it for you. She peeled the paper off a cupcake and held it out to Jax. For you. She smiled. Jax reached out. His small fingers brushed the frosting, and then the smell hit Kaelen. It wasn't sugar. It wasn't vanilla. It was acrid, metallic, like old pennies and bleach. It was a scent Kaelen remembered from the history books, from the warnings given to shifters about hunter traps. Silver nitrate, highly concentrated, lethal to a shifter child in seconds. It would burn his throat, close his airway, and stop his heart before he hit the floor. The world moved in slow motion. Jax's hand was closing around the cake. Vespera's smile was widening, her eyes glittering with anticipation. Kaelen didn't think. A surge of adrenaline, hotter than fire, flooded her veins. Kaelen lunged across the table. She didn't grab Jax, she struck him. She slapped the cupcake out of his hand with enough force that it flew across the gazebo, splattering against the glass wall. Don't eat it, Kaelen screamed. The silence was shattered instantly. You insolent bitch, Vespera shrieked, jumping to her feet. You struck the Prince Guard's guards. Jax, startled and confused. Started to cry. He looked at his hand, where a smear of frosting remained. The skin was already turning red, sizzling as if burned by acid. "It's poison," Kaelen yelled, grabbing a napkin and frantically scrubbing the frosting off Jax's skin. "Get it off him, it's poison." "She's lying," Vespera screamed, playing the victim with terrifying ease. "She attacked him. I saw it. She's crazy." 2 guards burst into the greenhouse, rifles raised. They saw the crying prince, the screaming noblewoman, and the maid holding the boy's arm. "Step away from the prince," the lead guard roared. "I can't," Kaelen cried, shielding Jax with her body. "She tried to kill him." "Take her down," Vespera commanded. The guard stepped forward, reaching for his baton, but he never reached her. The glass door of the greenhouse exploded inward. It wasn't a man who entered. It was a monster, a wolf the size of a warhorse, black as a starless night, crashed through the shattering glass. It was a creature of shadow and smoke, its eyes burning with molten gold fury. Ronan. He didn't bark. He didn't pause. He moved with a lethality that blurred the air. He slammed into the lead guard, tossing him aside like a rag doll without even breaking stride. He landed between Kaelen and Vespera, his claws digging into the stone floor, creating sparks. He lowered his massive head and let out a roar that shook the glass panes in their frames. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. Vespera froze, her face drained of color. She took a stumbling step back. "Ronan," she whimpered, holding her hands up. "Ronan. Thank God. She attacked Jax. I tried to stop her." The giant wolf turned his head. He looked at Kaelen. She was trembling, clutching Jax to her chest. She held out Jax's hand, showing the angry red burn mark where the frosting had touched him. "Smell it," Kaelen pleaded, pointing to the splattered cupcake on the wall. "Please, just smell it." The wolf turned back to Vespera. He snarled, snapping his jaws inches from her face. Vespera screamed and fell backward, scrambling across the floor in her expensive dress. Ronan didn't kill her. Not yet. A shimmering haze of black smoke surrounded the wolf. Bones cracked and reshaped. In seconds, the wolf was gone, standing in his place, breathing heavily, stark naked, but radiating enough power to level a city. Was the High Alpha. "Secure the room," Ronan ordered, his voice terrifyingly calm. More guards poured in, his personal elite guard. "Pick that up." Ronan pointed to the smashed cupcake. "Get the physician." "Now, Ronan. You can't be serious." Vespera sobbed, tears streaming down her perfect face. "You're going to trust a stray over me, over the council." The royal physician ran in, breathless. He scraped a sample of the frosting into a vial and added a reactive agent. The liquid turned pitch black instantly. "Silver nitrate." The physician gasped, looking up in horror. "And wolfsbane. Concentrated. It would have killed him instantly." The silence in the greenhouse was heavy, suffocating. Ronan turned to Vespera. His face was a mask of death. I didn't know," Vespera stammered, backing away until she hit the wall. "The baker. It must have been the baker, or her. She planted it. Silver nitrate of this purity doesn't come from a bakery," Ronan said, his voice low. He walked toward her. "And it doesn't come from a maid." He grabbed Vespera by the throat. He didn't squeeze, but he lifted her until her toes barely touched the ground. "Who gave it to you?" he roared. "My father," Vespera screamed, the truth tearing out of her in fear. "My father gave it to me," he said. "He said if the boy was gone, you would be weak, you would need the council, you would need me." Ronan threw her to the ground. She scrambled away, coughing and sobbing. "Take her to the cells," Ronan commanded the guards, "and keep her alive. She has a lot more to tell us." As they dragged the screaming woman away, the adrenaline left Kaelen's body. Her knees buckled. She slid to the floor, still holding Jax. The boy was crying softly, holding his burned hand. Ronan was there in an instant. He didn't care that he was unclothed. He didn't care about the staff watching. He dropped to his knees and wrapped his massive arms around both of them. "You saved him," Ronan whispered, burying his face in Kaelen's neck, inhaling the scent of her fear and her bravery. "You saved him. I smelled it." Kaelen sobbed, shaking uncontrollably. "I don't know how. It just smelled like death." Ronan pulled back. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. His golden eyes were burning with a realization that terrified him. "You aren't a Dormant, Kaelen," he said intensely. "No human nose could smell silver nitrate through that much sugar. Your wolf isn't dead. It's something else." He looked at the red burn on his son's hand. Then, at the empty door where Vespera had been dragged out. "We have a problem," Ronan said, his voice hardening into steel. "Vespera's father is the head of the council. If he ordered this, it means the council has turned. They want a coup. They want my son dead, and me replaced." He stood up, pulling Kaelen with him. "We have to leave," Kaelen said, panic rising. "We have to take Jax and run." "No," Ronan growled. "We don't run. We are obsidian. We do not run." He walked over to a pile of discarded cloaks by the door and threw one around himself. He turned to Kaelen, his expression shifting from fear to a dangerous, cold resolve. "Tonight is the Blood Moon Ball," Ronan stated. "Every alpha in the hemisphere will be there. The press, the council, Vespera's father. You can't go." Kaelen argued. "They'll try to kill you. They will try." Ronan agreed. He stepped closer to her, his hand gripping her chin, tilting her face up. "I was going to wait," he murmured, his thumb brushing her lower lip. "I was going to court you properly, give you time to adjust. But we are out of time." "What are you saying?" Kaelen whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I am done hiding you," Ronan said. "I am done pretending you are just the nanny. If they want a war, I will give them a war. But first, I will give them something to fear." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "Go upstairs, Kaelen. Put on the blue dress I had delivered. Wear the diamonds." "Why?" she breathed. "Because tonight," Ronan vowed, his voice vibrating with ancient power, "I am not walking into that ballroom alone. I am not introducing you as my employee. Tonight, in front of the council, in front of the world, and in front of the gods." He kissed her then hard, possessive, and searing with a promise of violence and devotion. "Tonight," he whispered against her lips, "I am claiming you as my mate." The Blood Moon Ball was the most watched event in the supernatural world. Cameras from every major network were positioned in the corners of the gilded ballroom, broadcasting live to millions. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, nervous sweat, and treachery. The 12 high elders of the council stood near the dais, looking smug. They believed the king was about to announce his resignation. They believed they had won. But when the heavy oak doors swung open, the room didn't just go quiet. It stopped breathing. King Ronan Draven didn't enter alone, and he didn't enter defeated. He walked in with Kaelen. She was no longer the invisible servant in a stained gray rag. She was a vision of midnight. She wore a floor-length gown of dark blue liquid silk that hugged every curve, shimmering like the night sky. Her hair was swept up, revealing the elegant curve of her neck, the same neck she had bared in submission weeks ago, now held high in defiance. She didn't look down. She looked straight ahead, her hand firmly gripping Ronan's forearm. Miles away, in a dingy sports bar on the edge of the Iron River territory, Bryce, the ex who had sold her for a check, watched the television screen. His beer slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. He stared at the woman he had called worthless, realizing too late that he had thrown away a queen. Back in the ballroom, the atmosphere was electric. Ronan ascended the stairs to the throne, pulling Kaelen up to stand beside him. He faced the cameras. He faced the council. For generations, you have told us that strength is only found in claws and teeth. Ronan's voice boomed, amplified by the microphones. You rejected those who were different. You cast them out. He looked at Kaelen, his eyes softening with an intensity that made the cameras zoom in. But tonight, I am rewriting the law. Kaelen Thorne is not a servant. She is not a guest. Lord Valen, Vespera's father and head of the council, stepped forward, his face purple with rage. This is an outrage. You bring a dormant to the throne, a defect. She is not a defect, Ronan roared, his alpha voice shaking the crystal chandeliers. She is my heart. She is the savior of the air. And as of this moment, she is my mate. The room erupted. Shouts of treason and sacrilege filled the air. Lord Valen pointed a shaking finger at the dais. Then you choose death, Valen screamed. He didn't wait for a vote. He whistled a sharp, piercing sound. The lights in the ballroom cut out instantly. For a second, there was total blackness. Then, red emergency flares popped, bathing the room in a hellish crimson glow. Crash. The glass ceiling above them shattered. 20 rogue wolves, wearing tactical gear and gas masks, rappelled down from the skylights. They hit the floor running, shifting mid-stride into massive, snarling beasts. Chaos broke loose. Guests screamed and dove under tables. The traitors leaped at the dais. Ronan shifted instantly. His midnight black wolf met the first wave of attackers in a violent clash of teeth and claws. He was the High Alpha, a warrior of legendary skill, but he was fighting 10 heavily armored wolves at once. He was buried under a pile of fur and snapping jaws. Kaelen. Ronan's mind link screamed into her head. Kaelen scrambled backward toward the safe room behind the throne where Jax was hiding. She was 10 feet away when the door was kicked open. A rogue guard dragged Jax out by the back of his small tuxedo jacket. The boy was kicking and screaming, his eyes flashing violet terror. No, Kaelen screamed, sprinting toward them. The rogue laughed a wet, barking sound. He raised a serrated blade, pressing it against the soft skin of Jax's throat. Stay back, the rogue snarled, or the pup dies first. Kaelen froze. She was 5 feet away. Ronan was pinned down, bleeding from a dozen wounds. There was no one coming to save them. The rogue tightened his grip. A single drop of blood welled up on Jax's neck. Say goodbye to Daddy, the rogue sneered, preparing to slice. And in that moment, Kaelen Thorne broke. The fear that had locked her inner self away for 24 years shattered. The trauma of her rejection, the shame of being dormant, the lifetime of being told she was nothing, it all dissolved under the weight of a mother's rage. Not my son. It wasn't a thought. It was a command that echoed from the bottom of her soul. She felt something snap deep inside her chest. But it wasn't a wolf waking up. It was something older, something hotter than fire and colder than the void. I am not a wolf. The voice inside her roared. I am the thing wolves fear. A scream ripped from her throat. It wasn't human. It was a harmonic resonance that vibrated in the bones of every person in the room, shattering every window in the palace. Time seemed to stop where Kaelen stood. There was an explosion of blinding white light. It blasted the rogue backward, knocking the knife from his hand. When the light faded, the girl in the blue dress was gone. Standing in her place was a creature of myth. She was massive, standing taller than the alpha males. Her fur was pure, incandescent white, glowing with an inner starlight. But she wasn't just a wolf. She had fox-like ears, nimble paws, and behind her, waving like ribbons of energy, were 9 tails made of pure, crackling light. A chimera, a spirit fox, the kitsune of legend, the rarest shifter form in existence, thought to be extinct for 1,000 years. The rogue guard scrambled backward on the floor, his eyes bulging. Impossible, he whispered. Monster. The White Queen didn't growl. She opened her mouth, and a beam of pure condensed energy gathered in her throat. She moved faster than the eye could follow. She didn't bite him. She passed through him. A wave of white fire engulfed the rogue. He didn't even have time to scream. He was simply vaporized, turning into ash before he hit the ground. She landed softly in front of the trembling prince. She lowered her massive head, nuzzling Jax's cheek, checking him for injuries. The fighting stopped. Every wolf in the room, friend and foe, froze. Their instincts, ancient and undeniable, forced them down, one by one. The rogues dropped their weapons. They lowered their bellies to the floor, whining in submission. Even Lord Valen fell to his knees, trembling violently. To fight a wolf was a battle. To fight a spirit fox was suicide. Ronan, bleeding and battered, pulled himself out of the pile of bodies. He looked up at the creature standing over his son. He saw the 9 tails swaying hypnotically, glowing with the power of the stars. He limped toward her. He didn't bow. He smiled. He let out a howl of triumph, a sound that told the world that the war was over. The cameras zoomed in. The whole world watched as the rejected defect stood over her enemies. A goddess in her true form, Kaelen Thorne hadn't just survived. She had ascended. And as Jax buried his face in her thick white fur, safe at last, everyone knew the reign of the Starlight Queen had begun. The silence that followed the blinding light was absolute. In the center of the ruined ballroom, surrounded by shattered glass and the ashes of her enemies, the massive 9-tailed fox stood victorious. The rogues dropped their weapons, pressing their foreheads to the cold floor in total, trembling submission. Lord Valen, the man who had orchestrated the coup, collapsed to his knees, his face pale with the realization of his own ruin. Miles away, in the flickering blue light of a sports bar, Bryce stared at the television screen. The beer bottle slipped from his numb fingers, shattering on the floor. He watched the woman he had thrown away, the woman he had called worthless, stand over the most powerful shifters in the world, radiating the power of the stars. I rejected a goddess, Bryce whispered into the empty air, the weight of his mistake crushing him. He knew, in that moment, he would spend the rest of his life haunted by the ghost of the girl he was too blind to see. Back in the palace, the white fire began to fade. The massive fox dissolved into motes of starlight. Kaelen shifted back. The adrenaline crashed, leaving her legs weak. She stumbled, her energy spent. She never hit the ground. Ronan was there. He caught her effortlessly, pulling her against his chest, shielding her naked form from the cameras with his own body. "I've got you," he murmured, echoing the words she had said to his son weeks ago. "I've got you." Small footsteps pattered across the dais. Jax slammed into their legs, sobbing with relief. Kaelen reached down, her hand tangling in the boy's hair. Grounding herself, she looked up at the High Alpha. His face was streaked with blood and soot, but his golden eyes were shining with fierce, undeniable pride. "You knew," she whispered breathlessly. "I suspected," Ronan corrected softly, his hand cupping her cheek. "I knew you were rare. I didn't know you were a miracle." He didn't care about the cameras. He didn't care about the council watching in fear. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was a kiss of possession, of gratitude, and of a promise kept. When he pulled back, he spoke 2 words loud enough for the world to hear. "My queen." They thought Kaelen Thorne was broken. They called her Dormant. They didn't understand that you have to break the earth to find a diamond. She wasn't empty. She was just waiting for a sky big enough to hold her light. "This is the reign of the Starlight Queen," Long may she burn. What would you do if your ex saw you become a queen? Would you forgive him? Or would you let him watch from the sidelines? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice, romance, and hidden power, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who needs a little inspiration. And subscribe to Moonfire Tales and hit the bell icon so you never miss our next dramatic story. Thanks for watching.